stood in the heart of the Academy's combat hall, a figure that looked almost out of place among the armored giants surrounding her. Eliara Cross, the lone human cadet, was slight in build, her arms too lean, her posture too fragile, a faint bruise still visible across her forearm, like an open invitation for ridicule. Around her, the alien cadets towered with gleaming exoskeletons, scaled hides, or hulking muscles shaped by worlds far harsher in appearance than Earth. Yet they laughed. Their voices echoed in a chorus of derision, the sound bouncing off the polished metal walls, each snicker digging into the silence where her dignity might have stood. They weren't just laughing at her body, they were laughing at the very idea of her presence, mocking a species they believed had no right to claim a place here. And the most striking part, the instructor didn't silence them. His mandibles clicked faintly, his compound eyes reflecting something between amusement and cold indifference. He let the laughter roll on, not because he failed to notice, but because he wanted this moment to play out. He wanted her humiliation to become the prelude to a lesson, a cruel experiment where she would either prove herself or be crushed beneath the weight of their scorn. To him, this was fair trial by fire. To her, it was the sharp sting of betrayal in a place meant for discipline and honor. But Eliara did not flinch. She stood rooted, her arms loose at her sides, her gaze steady yet distant, as if she had already lived through worse storms than this one. The cadets saw weakness in her stillness, mistaking quiet restraint for fear. They failed to recognize what viewers instantly felt deep inside. That same quiet has always belonged to those who carry fire beneath their skin. And isn't that the story of every underdog we remember? The one who is mocked, diminished, underestimated right before the world learns what they're truly capable of? That was the unspoken tension hanging in the hall. They saw bruises, but not the battles behind them. They saw frailty, but not the relentless gravity of the world she had been shaped by. They thought they were laughing at a joke, but the truth, the irresistible question, was this: who would be laughing when the fragile human revealed the price of underestimation? And the laughter hadn't even died down when the instructor raised his clawed hand for silence, his voice sharp and resonant as he declared what would come next. A sparring test, 1 cadet against 4. The choice of who stood alone wasn't random. His gaze fell on Eliara, the human who hadn't so much as shifted beneath the storm of mockery. For the sake of education, he said, the corners of his mandibles curling, let us see what fragility can do when pressed. Around her, the alien cadets erupted with fresh amusement. 4 of them stepped forward, predators circling before the kill. The announcement carried an undertone of cruelty, as though the Academy itself had conspired to stage a lesson in humiliation. 4 against 1, framed as fair because in their eyes, she wasn't worth even a single opponent. Eliara didn't argue. She didn't protest. She simply inclined her head, the faintest nod of acceptance that carried more weight than any words could have. Her calmness unsettled some of the onlookers. Who accepts certain defeat without hesitation? Was it resignation or something else hidden in that quiet confidence? That question slipped uncomfortably into the minds of those watching, though none dared voice it aloud. The instructor gestured toward the racks of weapons, the glittering array of alien engineering designed for efficiency and destruction. The chosen 4 moved first, snatching up advanced gear with the swagger of creatures certain of victory. Energy lances crackled in their hands. Plasma shields hummed with protective light. They grinned as they fitted themselves with reinforced armor, already boasting of how quickly they'd end the match. 30 seconds, maybe less. Their words weren't whispers. They wanted Eliara to hear. They wanted her to shrink beneath the weight of their confidence. When her turn came, she walked slowly along the rack, eyes moving over weapon after weapon, pausing now and then but never lifting her hand. Finally, she reached for the simplest issue available, a standard-issue combat baton and the lightest protective vest. No gleaming enhancements, no cutting-edge gadgets, nothing that screamed of tactical brilliance. To the watching crowd, it was confirmation of her weakness, the final nail in her coffin. The aliens sneered, sure they'd be handed a victory gift wrapped by her own choices. The arena walls sealed shut, locking them inside a circle where there would be no interruption, no escape. Overhead, the lights dimmed to a sterile glow, casting shadows that stretched like warnings across the floor. The instructor's voice boomed again, carrying both formality and a trace of anticipation. Begin in 10 seconds. The cadets spread out, their weapons raised, their laughter softening into predatory grins. Eliara stood alone in the center, her hands resting lightly on the plain baton, her face unreadable. The countdown began, each number like the drumbeat of inevitability. 9, 8, 7. The aliens shifted eagerly, their feet scraping the polished floor, their armor clinking with promise. 6, 5, 4. The audience leaned forward, breaths held, expecting to witness a spectacle of failure. 3, 2, 1. The final moment of silence hung in the air, heavy with tension. Then the signal sounded, and the impossible trial began. At first, the fight unfolded exactly as everyone expected. Eliara moved with what looked like hesitation, her steps uneven, her grip on the baton almost clumsy. The four cadets fanned out, circling her with the practiced ease of predators closing in. Their grins widened when they saw her stumble, when her baton dropped a fraction lower than it should have. To them, it was confirmation. This would be quick, easy, humiliating. Their jeers carried across the arena, the audience already leaning back, prepared to watch a farce rather than a contest. But something shifted in the very moment the first alien lunged. Her head tilted, her posture straightened, and the clumsiness fell away like a discarded mask. In a single breath, Eliara was no longer prey pretending to be brave. She was something else entirely. The baton snapped upward with the speed of a striking viper, meeting the alien's arm mid-swing. There was a sharp crack, the unmistakable sound of bone or chitin fracturing, and the cadet collapsed with a howl before he had even registered what had happened. The audience gasped, the laughter choked off. Silence bled into the hall like cold water. The second attacker hesitated, a heartbeat too long, then charged anyway, rage painted across his scaled features. Eliara spun to meet him, her body flowing with impossible precision. She stepped inside his guard, the baton hooking his weapon downward, while her elbow slammed into his jaw. He staggered back, but she didn't give him the chance to recover. A knee rose sharply, driving into his chest with enough force to lift him from the ground. His weapon clattered uselessly against the arena floor as his body crumpled. 2 down in less than 6 seconds. It wasn't elegance that stunned the crowd. It was the sheer brutality of it. This wasn't the kind of polished, rehearsed sparring the Academy taught. These were movements honed by necessity, by a world where hesitation meant death, where survival demanded efficiency over showmanship. There was no wasted motion, no flourish, only cold calculation. She dismantled her enemies as though she'd done it 1,000 times before. Every strike was decisive, every step positioned to end the fight before it could even begin. The remaining 2 circled warily now, their earlier confidence draining fast. What they had dismissed as weakness had been something far more dangerous, restraint. And restraint, when dropped, revealed the true depth of what she carried. Around the arena, cadets who had laughed minutes ago now stared in wide-eyed disbelief. The sound of cracking bones still echoed in their ears. The sight of one of their strongest lying, groaning on the floor burned into their vision. What had begun as comedy was turning into horror, and still Eliara hadn't broken a sweat. What had they missed? How had a human, small, frail, unarmored, become faster, sharper, deadlier than those bred for war? The question hovered unspoken, but the answer was unfolding in front of them. She wasn't fighting by their rules. She was fighting by the laws of a death world, where predators stalked every shadow and survival was carved into bone. The 2 who remained no longer grinned. Their earlier swagger was gone, replaced by narrowed eyes and tense shoulders, as they began to move more carefully, circling Eliara with weapons raised. This was no longer entertainment. They had just watched her drop their companions in seconds. And though pride urged them to believe they were different, instinct whispered otherwise. They shifted into formation, flanking her on opposite sides, confident that 2 coordinated fighters could overwhelm one. To the untrained eye, it looked solid. To Eliara, it looked like opportunity. She didn't rush them. She stepped back, her baton loose at her side, forcing them to advance. Their weapons hummed with lethal energy, but when they lunged together, her body dissolved into motion that defied prediction. One heartbeat she was in front of them, the next she was gone, sliding into the shadows cast by the arena's uneven lighting. A thud rang out behind them. One cadet spun, expecting to see her charging, only for a sharp sting to crack against his knee. His leg buckled, his cry sharp and guttural. She vanished again before his partner could respond, her silence heavier than their weapons. From the stands, whispers began to ripple. It was no longer mockery. It was disbelief, laced with the kind of unease reserved for predators sighted in the dark. The audience leaned forward, searching the arena floor, but every time they caught sight of her, she was already striking and gone again. It was as though the human had turned the arena itself into her ally, carving angles no one had trained for. Then her voice cut through the silence. Calm, precise, directed at her prey. Your stance is too high, easy to topple. A heartbeat later, the taller alien stumbled forward as her baton swept his ankle from beneath him. He hit the ground hard, weapons skidding away. Before he could reach for it, she pressed the baton against his throat and whispered loud enough for the room to hear. And you breathe too fast. Panic wastes oxygen. She struck him unconscious with a single clean blow. The last cadet's skin rippled with color, his species' involuntary tell of fear. He snarled to hide it, spinning in circles, weapons slicing the air at shadows. Eliara didn't rush to finish him. She let him sweat, let him stumble. Every scrape of his boots, every ragged breath amplified his terror because he no longer fought her. He fought the knowledge that she could strike from anywhere, anytime. He fired wildly into corners, missing nothing because there was nothing to hit. Until suddenly she was behind him. Her baton tapped gently against the base of his neck, almost playful. You rely on strength, she murmured, but strength means nothing when your enemy is faster. Then she struck, precise and merciless. He collapsed to the ground, stunned and silent. The arena froze. No cheers, no taunts. Only the sound of four bodies lying defeated where minutes ago they had laughed. Around the edges of the hall, cadets whispered what none dared speak aloud, that what they had witnessed wasn't a sparring match at all. It was a predator dismantling prey, and for the first time since the human had entered their world, they were forced to ask themselves whether fragility was weakness or camouflage. The instructor descended from his observation post with a stiffness that betrayed what he would never admit aloud. His mandibles clicked softly, not in amusement this time, but in unease, the subtle rhythm of someone struggling to reconcile expectation with reality. He had designed this test to expose weakness, to strip away bravado, to remind the cadets that the galaxy had no room for fragile illusions. Instead, the illusion had been his own, shattered in less than 10 minutes by the cadet he had considered least likely to endure. He stopped in front of Eliara, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her smaller one. For a moment he said nothing, compound eyes studying the calm face of the human who stood unbothered among four unconscious opponents. At last, his voice emerged, lower than before, almost uncertain. Explain this, he demanded, though it carried more curiosity than command. Eliara tilted her head, wiping a fleck of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. You train for combat, she said simply, her tone level, steady. I was born in it. My world never gave me the luxury of fairness. The words landed with the weight of truth, sharp enough to pierce through arrogance. Around them, the cadets shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. She continued, her voice carrying across the silent hall. You rehearse patterns, memorize tactics, rely on rules written by people who've only ever studied war from a safe distance. On Earth, rules are the first thing that break. You learn to adapt, to strike where you're not expected, to survive when survival shouldn't be possible. That's not training. That's instinct. The instructor's mandibles twitched again, but this time it wasn't irritation. It was acknowledgement. He had seen many victories, many strategies played out in the arena, but none like this. None born of desperation transformed into strength. The cadets who had once laughed now kept their gazes fixed on the floor. Their earlier bravado dissolved into a fragile silence. They weren't just thinking about Eliara anymore. They were thinking about themselves. How predictable, how vulnerable, how unprepared they might be if thrown into the kind of fight she had described. For the first time, they understood the fragility wasn't hers. It was theirs. The silence in the hall was still heavy when the first alarm blared. A shrill wail cut through the walls, vibrating across the steel floors, shattering whatever fragile sense of order remained. The instructor froze, mandibles twitching, as colored lights bathed the arena in an urgent red glow. Then the announcement thundered through every speaker. Hostile breach detected in the outer hangar bay. This was no simulation. This was no lesson. The academy was under attack. Cadets who had been whispering only moments earlier now snapped to rigid attention, their bravado dissolving into nerves. Orders poured in through comms, voices of senior officers barking for deployment, defensive positions, containment lines. The instructor turned sharply toward his unit, the weight of command heavy in his stance, but his eyes flickered toward Eliara with something close to hesitation. She had proved herself against classmates, yes, but raiders were no sparring partners. Raiders didn't follow rules. They came for blood, for plunder, for chaos. Did he risk sending her, or did he hold her back? Alira made the choice for him. Without waiting for his call, she stepped forward. "I'll go," she said, voice firm, steady, unshaken by the alarm or the shadows of what lay ahead. Around her, the cadets stiffened. Just hours ago, they had laughed at the thought of her fighting beside them. Now, when she volunteered, not one dared mock her. Some glanced at her with something that looked disturbingly close to fear. Others looked almost relieved, as if her presence might tilt the odds back in their favor. The instructor studied her for a long moment, torn between doubt and the undeniable evidence of what he had witnessed. Finally, he inclined his head. "Very well, you will deploy." The words carried no sarcasm this time, only the grim recognition that what had been proven in the arena would now be tested on the battlefield. As the squad filed out toward their assignments, the change in atmosphere was palpable. The cadets no longer whispered jests behind her back. Their silence was edged with unease, with curiosity, with the dawning realization that they might be safer with her than without her. The mockery had died, replaced by respect that was raw and unspoken. The corridors vibrated with the thrum of sirens and the pounding of boots. Eliara kept her pace calm, steady, the baton from her earlier fight still in her grip, as though it belonged there. For the others, this was escalation beyond anything they had trained for. For her, it was familiar. She had lived her entire life with the threat of sudden danger, with predators at the edge of every horizon. And now, as the hangar doors loomed ahead, she knew the test was no longer about proving herself to them. It was about survival. The line had been crossed. No more practice, no more simulations. This was life or death, and for the first time they were about to learn what that meant for a Deathworlder. The hangar smelled of ozone and burning metal, the sharp tang of weapons fire already saturating the air by the time the cadets arrived. Raiders poured through a breached docking gate, their armor mismatched but brutal, their movements precise enough to betray years of ruthless practice. They expected chaos, cadets scrambling in panic, easy spoils gathered from frightened students. And for the first moments, that's exactly what they saw. Alien trainees pressed behind cover, hands trembling as they tried to remember drills that suddenly felt like child's games against real killers. But in the middle of that fear, Eliara moved differently. She didn't cower, didn't wait for orders from officers who hadn't yet caught up to the reality of the breach. She assessed the environment the way only someone who had lived her life inside danger could. Her eyes caught the power conduits snaking along the walls, the loose fuel canisters stacked carelessly by the loading platforms, the uneven lines of sight between raider formations. To others, it was chaos. To her, it was a map of opportunities. She signaled sharply to two cadets who still held their rifles like untrained novices. "Shoot there," she ordered, pointing at a stack of containers. They obeyed instinctively, desperate for direction. The blast toppled the stack into a shower of sparks and shrapnel that sent 3 raiders diving for cover. The cadets blinked in disbelief. Had they really just forced professionals to retreat? Eliara didn't pause to explain. She was already moving. The fight that followed looked nothing like the Academy's neat training simulations. Eliara darted between cover with a speed that made her seem untouchable, striking where no one expected, vanishing before retaliation could land. She used the raiders' own aggression against them, drawing them forward into choke points where their numbers counted for nothing. Every corner of the hangar became her battlefield, every object a weapon in waiting. She jammed the locking mechanism of a maintenance door, trapping 2 raiders inside as automated defense turrets activated. She ripped a panel from the floor and rewired its circuit in seconds, sending a surge through the nearest corridor that left enemy armor sizzling and useless. The cadets who had mocked her earlier found themselves clinging to her every command. When she shouted for them to flank, they moved. When she told them to fall back, they obeyed. She led, not through rank, but through sheer, undeniable survival instinct that demanded respect. Fear had turned their hands unsteady at the start, but now they fought with grim determination, following the human who had transformed their panic into precision. The raiders began to falter. Their training hadn't prepared them for this, for an enemy who refused to fight by recognizable rules. Every tactic they tried crumbled against her unpredictability. Eliara shifted her approach constantly, never giving them the comfort of a pattern. One moment she fought up close, her baton cracking against armor joints. The next she triggered a trap that turned their own grenades back on them. Each small victory bled into the next, and with every raider that fell, their confidence fractured further. From the observation deck, instructors and officers watched with wide eyes. What should have been a massacre of inexperienced cadets had turned into a rout of hardened raiders. And at the center of it all was the girl they had once dismissed as fragile. Her body moved like a storm through the hangar, precise and merciless, leaving raiders scrambling not just from injury, but from fear itself. She wasn't simply defending the academy, she was dismantling the will of her enemies to fight. One raider, larger than the rest, charged at her with a roar, his weapon raised high. Eliara sidestepped, sliding low, and drove her baton into the exposed joint of his leg. He toppled with a bellow, and before he could rise, she pressed the edge of a scavenged blade against his throat. "Run," she whispered, loud enough for the others to hear. And he did. The sight of their strongest fleeing broke the last threads of cohesion in the raider ranks. Panic rippled outward, turning warriors into prey. Within minutes, the remaining invaders scattered, abandoning their weapons in desperate bids to escape the nightmare the human had unleashed upon them. The breach that should have spelled disaster ended instead in retreat, the hangar floor littered not with cadet bodies, but with discarded raider gear and the stunned silence of an academy that had just witnessed its greatest reversal. When the final alarm ceased and the gates sealed once more, the cadets looked at Eliara differently. No laughter, no whispered slurs about fragility. Only silence, weighted with the realization that the one they had mocked had saved them all. The instructor approached, his mandibles tight, his eyes unreadable. Around them, the once proud cadets lowered their gazes. Not out of shame this time, but out of reverence. Eliara stood amid the wreckage, her baton still in hand, her breathing steady, as though she had merely completed another training exercise. To her, this was survival. To them, it was revelation. The weakling they had scorned was gone. In her place stood the Academy's most feared, most respected cadet, the Deathworlder who had turned the tide when everything should have been lost. The smoke cleared slowly from the hangar, the acrid sting of burned circuitry lingering in the air. Raiders had fled, the wounded were being carried off, and the Academy's defense grid hummed back to life. For most, the battle had ended with exhaustion etched across their faces, the tremor of adrenaline still coursing through their veins. But Eliara stood apart, calm, steady, her baton lowered as if the chaos had barely touched her. The cadets who had once mocked her avoided her gaze. Their heads lowered, the memory of laughter soured into something far heavier. Respect, yes, but tinged with fear. The instructor approached, his usual authority tempered by a silence that bordered on reverence. He stopped before her, mandibles clicking once, uncertain whether the sound betrayed unease or acknowledgement. "One lesson," he said finally, voice stripped of arrogance. "If you could give this academy a single rule, what would it be?" Eliara didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, her eyes scanning the wreckage as if weighing which truth the moment deserved. Then her lips curved into a faint grim smile. "Rule 1, she said softly, though her words carried across the hall. "Never mistake kindness for weakness." Her gaze lifted, meeting the eyes of those who dared to look at her. "And Rule 2, never laugh at a human on a death world." The words landed like a strike, sharp enough to make several cadets flinch. No one argued. No one scoffed. The laughter that had once filled these walls felt impossibly distant, a memory they wished they could erase. Around the hangar, heads lowered further, not out of shame alone, but out of recognition that their survival had hinged on the one they had underestimated most. The instructor inclined his head, not quite a bow, but close enough to betray something unthinkable only hours ago. Respect. The cadets remained quiet, too shaken to speak, too humbled to risk shattering the silence that her declaration had carved into the room. Eliara didn't linger to bask in it. She turned away, slipping her baton back into its holster, her steps steady as she walked toward the exit. And perhaps that was the most unsettling part of all. For her, this was not triumph, not a story to replay with pride. It was simply another day survived, another fight endured, another reminder of what life on her world had demanded of her. While others would replay her words for years to come, she was already thinking about something as ordinary as her next meal. Because for a Deathworlder, what others called extraordinary was simply the way life had always been.